everyone, and welcome to the lineup. A Merry Christmas Eve to you. Today is December the 23rd, 2021. I'm Barry Stagner, reminding you again, coming up at the end of January, we've got a proximity conference, a Bible prophecy conference. And as long as things hold up and Amir is able to travel, there's some restrictions going on in Israel right now. Amir will be joining me, as well as Pastor Jack Hibbs and also Pastor Mike Golay, operations manager for Behold Israel. And you can sign up for the conference at cctustin.org. And I encourage you to do so as things are moving quickly. And we've got about a 1,700 seat auditorium that's available to us. And Calvary Chapel East Anaheim has very graciously opened their doors to us again this year. So cctustin.org, that's proximity, holding fast is our theme this year. And in this ever-changing world, boy, do we need to know how to do so and also find some encouragement that Jesus is coming soon. So with that, let's jump into our stories today. And as we usually do, we'll start with Israel. And this is an interesting story coming out of the Jewish News Syndicate. The headline reads, Lebanon blasts latest reminder of Hamas' growing armed presence to Israel's north. The deadly explosion that tore through a Hamas arms depot on December 10th in a mosque in the Burj al-Shamali refugee camp in the southern Lebanese city of Tyre is a vivid reminder of Hamas' growing organized armed presence on Lebanese territory and Iran's role in helping it grow. The blast killed a Hamas engineer named Hamza Ibrahim Shahini, whose funeral turned into a gun battle between gunmen from Fatah and Hamas, leaving 3 people dead. 2 months before the blast, the mosque Burj al-Shamali was flagged as a central weapons manufacturing workshop in a detailed report by the Alma Center, a security watchdog based in northern Israel. Hamas' growing armed presence is not only a serious challenge for Hezbollah due to Hamas' independent decision-making on when to fire rockets at Israel, it's also creating a challenge for Fatah in Lebanon, according to Major Tal Beiri, director of the research department at the Alma Center. Hamas does not just see itself as a guest in Lebanon, said Beiri, who served for 20 years in the IDF military intelligence directorate. It's a serious challenge for Hezbollah in Lebanon because of its independent activities and force buildup, and it is also in a state of significant tension with Fatah, the central Palestinian movement in Lebanon, he stated. All of this serves Iran well, giving the Islamic Republic multiple proxies and allies that it can encourage to act against Israel from Lebanon, and giving it options when Hezbollah wishes to focus on domestic Lebanese crisis and to dial down tensions with Israel. According to documents we have, Hamas aspires to create precise rockets guided by GPS with a range of 20 kilometers at the first stage, said Beiri. This is a secret project. In 2018, Hamas came up with a working plan for Lebanon, sketching out the building of battalions with hundreds of members, creating an elite attack force that is a mirror image of the elite Nabi strike force in Gaza, based on 130 terror operatives. Now, this is interesting because we do know that Lebanon is not named specifically in the Ezekiel war scenario. We do know that there are nations that are identified there who are very aggressively posturing themselves on the northern border of Israel, but there's not just Syria that shares a border on the north of Israel. There's also Lebanon. And Lebanon is kind of an interesting phenomenon because back when the Ottoman Empire was divided up in the 1918 to 1920 era, it was actually established as an Arab Christian country. It became independent in 1943, and to this very day, there's a strong Christian presence in Lebanon. Some 41% of the population claims to be some portion of the Christian church, and this is against now some 57% Muslim rather, and this is divided evenly between Shia and Sunni. So this country that was established as a home for Arab Christians back when the Ottoman Empire was divided up has now become a stronghold for Hamas and Fatah and, of course, Hezbollah. And this is interesting because, again, we have no mention of Lebanon in the invading forces, but they are to the north. And actually, these proxies are those who are operating under the guise of independent, but they're actually being driven by Iranian directives. So Hamas, as the article said, acts independently, but it's kind of interesting that the word Hamas is the Hebrew word for violence. And we do know that as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the time of the end. And the earth was filled with violence, according to Genesis. So this is interesting to see now this military activity on the other northern border of Israel. And it's possible that they are unnamed because Iran is actually the driving force behind them. So could be just simply a directional thing and not necessarily a national thing or a country name that's necessary to participate in this invasion from the north. Certainly seems to include Syria, as we see the military presence of the Russians, the Iranians, and Turkey, all participants in the invasion from the north, and of course their recent associations with Sudan and Turkey, especially with a presence now, and Russia, I should say, with a presence now in Libya and basically directing traffic in those two countries as well. So interesting to see now this other northern portion of Israel now coming into play. And this could potentially weigh in heavily on Bible prophecy. Our next story comes from the Times of Israel, and the headline reads, Meeting Bennett on Iran. Biden envoy says U.S. Israel must develop a common strategy. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met on Wednesday in Jerusalem with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan with other visiting U.S. officials as Israel remained concerned over Western talks in Vienna with Iran over its nuclear program. Sullivan said that the U.S. and Israel are at a critical juncture in facing a major set of security issues and need to develop a common strategy that serves both their interests. Now, let me pause here for a moment before we keep reading. I think that's such an interesting statement. It's Israel that's at stake. It's Israel's security that's at stake. And I'm not sure what the interests are that the National Security Advisor is talking about that we have, other than the fact that Iran considers us the great Satan and Israel the little Satan. But Israel's national security is at stake here in all this. And I'd say they're far more invested in their reasons to militarily engage than the U.S. is. However, the article goes on to say, these days are pretty important, Bennett told Sullivan in public remarks in English. Ahead of their meeting, what happens in Vienna has profound ramifications for the stability of the Middle East and the security of Israel for the upcoming years. And that's why it's such a timely meeting. Sullivan told the Prime Minister that U.S. President Joe Biden sent him to Israel even just before Christmas to coordinate and cooperate on their approach to Iran and other security issues. Now, what a silly statement to tell the Prime Minister of Israel that this is so important. I even came before Christmas, something that obviously Bennett doesn't recognize as a practicing Orthodox Jew. The article goes on to say, at a critical juncture for both of our countries on a major set of security issues, it's important that we sit together and develop a common strategy, a common outlook, and find a way forward that fundamentally secures your country's interest and mine, said Sullivan. And we believe those interests, like the values upon which our countries are built, are deeply shared and deeply felt. And Sullivan then held meetings with Defense Minister Benny Gantz and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. And the meeting between Sullivan and Gantz focused on Iran, the Defense Ministry said. During the meeting, a variety of strategic and cooperative issues were discussed, chief among them the Iranian nuclear fight and Iran's regional aggression, Gantz's office said, noting that the IDF chief Aviv Kohavi and the Director General of the Defense Minister Amir Eshel also attended the meeting. Now, again, obviously the U.S. has interest there, and our interests are the survival of Israel. And they're really, truly our only ally in the Middle East. They are the only democracy, true democracy in the Middle East. They're the only place where all the major religions of the world are free to move about and practice their faith, just like here in the United States. So the relationship is important. There is a vested interest that the United States has. But as far as the survival of Israel, that's Israel's responsibility. And the U.S. should not be telling them what they can and cannot do. And I don't think Israel is going to put up with that anyway. But interesting that we see the U.S. participating really in allowing, through the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action back in 2015, in the Obama era, the advancement of the nuclear program in Israel. And now they're trying to sit down at the table with Bennett and Lapid and Gantz and say, well, we have to come up with a common strategy. Well, if that common strategy allows the Iranians to continue to enrich uranium and stockpile enriched uranium and put it on a warhead, I'd say that's not a common interest situation. So we'll see how this plays out. But again, Iran, a leading factor in the invasion from the north into Israel, again continues to be a problem for Israel. Reuters, says the Iranians fired ballistic and cruise missiles in a Gulf War game. Iran's Revolutionary Guards fired ballistic and cruise missiles on Tuesday during war games in the Gulf, state TV reported, amid heightened tensions with the U.S. over Israel over possible Israeli plans to target Iranian nuclear sites. The use of ballistic missiles by the Revolutionary Guards Navy is a new concept, and they hit their targets with 100% precision, according to Guards Chief General Hossein Salami, as he told the interviewer. Iran says its ballistic missiles have a range of 2,000 kilometers, or around 1,200 miles, and are capable of reaching their arch foe, Israel, and U.S. bases in the Middle East. On Monday, Iran warned of a crushing response to any move against it by Israel, which opposes efforts by world powers to revive Tehran's 2015 nuclear deal and has long threatened military action if diplomacy fails to prevent it from acquiring a nuclear bomb. Iran says its nuclear ambitions are peaceful. Well, again, you have to ask the question, why then do you continue to enrich uranium above the 20% threshold, which allows you to use it for energy products and medical research as well? And again, obviously, they're clearly have aspirations that are not, or ambitions that are not peaceful at all. And they do seek the destruction of Israel. And Israel has continued to interrupt through cyber attacks and direct drone strikes their capabilities to enrich uranium, even as we saw in this past month, that very thing happening at the Natanz enrichment facility. So again, we're coming in close to it, kind of the line in the sand, so to speak, that Israel is going to have to act, because now they've tested they've tested ballistic missiles that are able to reach cities in Israel and elsewhere in the Middle East, as they said. And now with enriched uranium to the weapons grade category, 90%, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from slapping a warhead on one of those missiles and striking Israel, which they have made no bones about. That is their intention. Our next article proves it to be so, and comes again from the Jewish News Syndicate. And the headline reads, "The annihilation of the regime occupying Jerusalem is the greatest ideal." In an interview last month with Iran's ISNA, Iranian Armed Forces spokesman, General Alfazi Shakarki, set out his ideological doctrine regarding the West, Israel, and the regional order Iran is trying to create. Notably, his statements frame the call for the annihilation of Israel as an ideal and as a major goal towards which the Iranian regime was working. Israel, he stressed, is a tool of international Zionism that seeks to enslave the subjects of God, that is, Muslims. All Arab Muslim countries that aid Israel are considered by the Iranian regime to be part of Israel's illegitimate regime. Baji thought, he explained, is the only existing ideology resisting Zionism and has become the only effective weapon of the nations oppressed by Zionism and by the arrogance that is the United States. The Bajis is one of 5 branches within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He detailed the satanic hierarchy of the Western countries. The United States, again, is the great Satan, while such countries as France and Britain are smaller Satans. All these Satans, he said, are seeking to enslave the Muslims and other peoples and plunder their resources using the cultural influence of the values of the infidel world via technology. He also spoke out against intellectuals and political activists in Iran who are calling for reaching understandings with the United States. And again, I think it's worth pausing for a moment and reminding us all that the Iranian people are distinct from the Iranian regime. And there's been great unrest, as this article points out, even amidst the intelligentsia of Iran, to simply take a more peaceful and cooperative approach with the rest of the world. And yet, here, when you've got a regime that is driven by the desire to establish a caliphate, of which they are the head, as supreme leader, is the head, that's falling on deaf ears, as it has now since 1979. So, once again, you see this type of language coming out of the Iranian regime and the double talk. They claim that their nuclear aspirations are peaceful, and yet here you've got one of the leaders of one of the supposed elite Revolutionary Guard Corps groups saying that the destruction of Israel and the Zionists that support it is the ultimate goal. The Times of Israel is reporting that 4,000 U.S. immigrants moved to Israel in 2021, the highest annual figure since 1973. Now, this is interesting, especially in light of the beautiful passages in Ezekiel 37 and 38 and 39 that records the war scenario. But Israel, I think we've all heard the statement that Mark Twain, upon his touring the land of Israel, back then it was called Palestine, he called it a godforsaken place where in his travels he saw from one end of the country to the other not a single human or animal. And yet today it's teeming with not just people, but the desert has blossomed like a rose, as Ezekiel foretells, and Isaiah as well. And it's interesting to see these things happening and the return of so many Jews since the 1890s making Aliyah back to Israel, and to see it continue today, even in the midst of the pandemic, is an encouraging thing. And the article says 27,050 people in all made the Jewish state their new home this year, up 30% from the year before, but still below pre-bug numbers. A total of 27,050 new immigrants arrived in Israel, representing a 30% increase over the previous year's particularly low figures, the Immigration and Absorption Ministry announced Wednesday. The new arrivals included 4,000 immigrants from the United States, the highest figure since 1973, and a 30% rise over last year. Another 400 immigrants arrived from Canada, bringing the total number of immigrants from North America in 2021 to over 4,400. The figures reported. France saw a 40% leap, with 3,500 arriving, the highest number in 4 years. And there were 7,500 immigrants from Russia, a 10% increase over 2020, and 3,000 from Ukraine, up some 5% this year. And this is important, I think, for us to recognize because, there are some I remember reading in my studies. J. Vernon McGee, a wonderful, wonderful godly man, believed that all the Jews had to be back within the physical borders of Israel for prophecy to be fulfilled. I don't necessarily agree with that, but here's what I do know. There is an Israel, and that Israel is 73 years old. And however long a generation lasts that sees the fig tree budding again, we don't know. But what we do know is that they've been around since May 14th, 1948, at least on the U.S. calendar. It was May 14th, 15th in Israel. Excuse me again. But it's awesome to see the Bible happening, and what a privileged generation we are. And, this reminds me of Daniel 12:4. Daniel was told to seal up the vision, and that he wouldn't understand everything that he himself had written, that the Holy Spirit had inspired him to put down on the page. But there would be a generation that could see and understand these things clearly, and it would be at the time of the end. And listen, we can see things that previous generations of the church were not able to see. There's nearly 2 millennia of Christians who lived and died who wondered, how in the world is Ezekiel 37 going to be fulfilled? Well, we're not waiting for it to be fulfilled. It's history. And Israel is fast approaching becoming a generation old. And again, we don't know the day or the hour. We're not speculating. We're not date setting. Excuse me again, or any of those things. But the reality is there is an Israel, and the Jews are still making Aliyah and heading back to their national homeland. Now, our next story comes from the Russian paper Zarzem, and the headline reads, Moscow says ready for military response if NATO doesn't address the Kremlin's concerns. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov today warned NATO the Kremlin's security concerns need to be addressed or else. I said that we would find forms to respond, including by military and military technical means, if NATO ignores Moscow's concerns. Again, the high-ranking Russian diplomat told the TASS news agency. I reaffirm this. We will have to balance the activities that are of a concern to us because they increase the risk with our countermeasures, Rybakov said. On December 17th, the Russian Foreign Ministry released 2 Russian draft documents on the provision of legal security guarantees from the United States and NATO. Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier called on NATO to begin substantive talks on reliable long-term security guarantees to Russia. He stressed that Russia needs legally binding guarantees because the West has failed to fulfill its verbal commitments. Now, this is interesting. It certainly flies under the wars and rumors of war category of the things Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24, 3-8, and in the Olivet Discourse that are going to be happening during the last days scenario leading up to the ultimate war that is ended by the return of Jesus. And by the way, before this time of wrath begins on this earth, there is what I like to refer to as the Great Escape. I remind our church that the Great Escape precedes the Great Tribulation. And listen, for those who like to say, oh, you Christians just want to escape the Great Tribulation, and that's why you're so fascinated with the rapture, you betcha. I want to escape the Great Tribulation. I want nothing to do with it. And I'm thankful that the Lord has promised that he's going to come and get us before he unleashes his wrath on a Christ-rejecting world and finalizes the discipline of Israel so that when he returns, they will look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. At least 1/3 of them will do so. Now, our next story also comes from Zarazem. And again, it's interesting to read international papers. Excuse me. And to see their perspective on things as we get our media push here, which is without question tainted and slanted. And that's exactly what this article is pointing out. To mask Biden being controlled by Beijing, the headline says, and the coming invasion of Taiwan, corrupt media moves to an old favorite, Russia, Russia, Russia. And again, this is a Russian newspaper. As the Biden administration's political capital implodes to catastrophic levels, the corrupt corporate media is launching a new diversion, naming an old nemesis of the new Western oligarch deep state as enemy number one. Wait for it, the article says, Russia, Russia, Russia. Let's just recap the last few months of Biden betrayals, kowtowing to Beijing, turning over Afghanistan to Beijing, destroying the American dollar and the U.S. economy, an invasion on the southern border, the destruction of U.S. military readiness by vaccine mandates. We could go on and on all day long. To be clear, Russia is a clever and dangerous adversary, but they are not an existential threat at this time in history. That honor belongs to the Chinese Communist Party, who has committed acts of war against this nation over the last 2 years, including biological warfare. A Russian invasion of Ukraine seems to be the new narrative du jour, as the corrupt media attempts to take America's eye off the CCP ball. The Kremlin has massed a large number of troops in the annexed Crimean Peninsula, and it is possible they could use Biden weakness to take back territory lost from the breakup of the Soviet Union. However, this would be extremely costly to the Kremlin, as Ukraine has built up a robust defense capability over the last decade. If in any event, when looking at the national security of the United States, the loss of Taiwan, with its plethora of high-technology chip manufacturing for Western economies, and the strategic choke point for maintaining freedom of international trade, a far worse blow to America than the loss of Kiev. But Taiwan is not on the corporate media front pages. Ukraine is. Now, again, I think this is interesting, and obviously they're putting their own spin on the issues of the military buildup on the Ukrainian border and the intentions clearly that Russia is considering going beyond the saber rattling and the rhetoric and taking back this particular portion. And for them to say, the Ukrainians are pretty well armed after the last 10 years. Nothing in comparison to the Russian military. So again, trying to spin the story without question, but they do make a point. Here we've had multiple issues regarding the current U.S. administration and a relationship with China. And yet again, the corrupt corporate media, as the article calls them, or the media knights, as my friend Amir refers to them, is indeed trying to spin the story away from some of the corruption that is within our own administration. And sadly, this is part of what we know is going to happen during the Ezekiel war scenario. The one friend of Israel, the greatest friend of Israel, the United States of America, is going to be silent at the invasion, and the only protesting nations are going to be the Arab Gulf states, and the U.S. will have no voice for some reason in this invasion. So, what that reason is, we don't know. Many have speculated that it will be economic collapse or even a military invasion. And now here we are doing exactly what the article says. We're weakening our military position. We're presenting ourselves as weak in the eyes of the world by these ridiculous moves that we're having come out of this administration regarding the jab and people not being allowed to make their own health decisions. And I think wisdom that comes from all over the medical community is that the government has no business messing with the health of individuals when you've got people, boots on the ground, that are quitting their jobs or getting fired in massive numbers. We got a story about that coming up as well. CNBC says Germany's head of Navy calls China's naval power buildup explosive and a cause of worry. Vice Admiral Joachim Schonbach said China is increasing the size of its navy by the equivalent of the entire French Navy every 4 years. China's growing naval power is explosive and a cause for concern, the German chief said, who urged Beijing to follow the international rules-based order. I can understand the political leaders in China now say we want to have a big navy, and we want to have a blue water navy or a deep water navy, of course, also to make power, Schonbach said. A blue water navy is one that can operate globally in open oceans and is not limited to nearshore functions. The question is if they fit into the international rules-based order, he said. Schonbach made his comments as the German frigate Bayern is docked in Singapore. The Bayern arrived Monday as part of a 6-month deployment to Asia Pacific. It is sailing through the South China Sea, marking the first deployment of a German warship to the Indo-Pacific in almost 20 years. China's growing naval might has become a source of increasing concern for the U.S. as well as democracies in Europe and Asia. And according to a recent report on Chinese military power, the U.S. Department of Defense said China is the world's biggest ship-producing nation and is nearly self-sufficient in those endeavors. It also expects China's second domestically built aircraft carrier to enter service by 2024 and projects the country to maintain between 65 and 70 submarines by the mid-2020s. Mid-2020s is just a couple years away. Interesting story. But let me also comment on this, that, we don't necessarily see China in any of the invasion stories. I don't believe that China is represented in the Kings of the East in the Revelation 16 passage. And we don't really see any direct mention of them in any of the war scenarios. And, here's something to consider. China is basically being financed by all the nations who buy their goods. And that's really where the United States has made, as many have proposed, a grave error in basically outsourcing everything that we buy instead of the good old made in the USA label stuck on it. And, I find myself frustrated with this continually. I think I'm like the rest of you. Amazon has become the new mall, and you grab some stuff from Amazon, and then once you get the shipping notification, it says it's coming from China. And, so if you have consumer nations like the U.S., and this is one of the interesting things about the fall of Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18, the nations that see Babylon destroyed ask the question, who's going to buy our stuff? Not what happened to all those poor people or what happened to this destroyed country, but rather who's going to buy our stuff? And again, considering the impact this could have on China, as well as the amount of money the U.S. owes China, there could be an economic collapse that causes them also to become a non-factor late in the last days scenario and on into the tribulation. Who knows? But again, I'm glad we're not going to be here during that whole 7-year period. We're not going at the midpoint. We're certainly not going at the end. There's no point in that. And the only time that makes any sense for the church to be taken out of the way, for God to deal directly with Israel once again, is before the tribulation. So, and I got to say, come quickly, Lord Jesus. This world is getting weirder by the minute. Christian Headline says, and this is proof of what I just said, Illinois governor signs law letting teen girls get an abortion without the parents knowing. Imagine that. What has happened to our country? It used to be that you couldn't get an aspirin from the school nurse without parental permission. You can't get your your minor age child ears pierced without parental permission. But now school can take your daughter off campus and kill the unborn child that's growing in her and keep it a secret from you. So allegedly protecting the child from the parents. And this is what the governor says. He says he was protecting reproductive rights. J.B. Pritzker signed a bill into law Friday that allows teenage girls to obtain an abortion without notifying their parents. The new law, dubbed the Youth Health and Safety Act, or HB 370, repeals a 1995 law that required minors to notify their parents or guardians 48 hours prior to having an abortion. With reproductive rights under attack across the nation, Illinois is once again establishing itself as a leader in ensuring access to health care services, Pritzker said. Well, actually, what they're doing is they're leading their state down the tubes. This repeal was essential because it was the most vulnerable pregnant minors who were punished by this law, victims of rape and physical abuse in unsafe homes. And again, they keep touting this particular element of it. And I'm not sure what the most recent numbers are. It may be a bit higher because we know the pandemic has brought on a lot of things. But the number of people who get an abortion because of being raped or physically abused is well under 5%, even I believe under 2%. But again, this is the banner they wave. The rest is just birth control. They had sex. They don't want their parents to find out. The girl got pregnant. So the school is able, under the governor's leadership, to take the daughter and have a major medical procedure without the parents' knowledge. And despite Pritzker's reasoning, the 1995 law included an exception for victims of sexual abuse and also allowed minors to petition the court for a waiver if, for example, a minor came from an abusive home. So again, it's not really the issue. The 1995 law watched out for those type of victims of these situations. But again, the new law's legislative findings pointed to abortion restrictions in Mississippi and Texas and asserted that Illinois, again, is called to be an example for the nation in the protection of reproductive health care. And listen, abortion isn't health care. It ends the life of someone. That's not health care. And listen, while working to establish healthy family communications, did you hear that? The school can take your daughter to get an abortion. And one of the goals of this is without the parents' knowledge. And one of the goals of this is establishing healthy family communications, protecting the health and safety of youth, including those who are pregnant, and parenting, and investing in individuals throughout their lives. Supporters of the 1995 law, though, said the new law harms parent-child relationships. Well, no kidding. I think what these people don't seem to understand is that, there's grandparents involved here too, potential grandparents, I should say. And it's just amazing to see such delusional thinking, evil being called good and good being called evil. And even the braggadocious manner in which this governor speaks about how Illinois is the champion and leading the way for the rest of the country in reproductive rights. And how simply evil can you get? Now, the Associated Press is reporting that Pope Francis says no country can exempt itself from the duty to take in migrants. Pope Francis appeared to take a shot at Hungary on Wednesday, insisting no country can exempt itself from the obligation to take in migrants. On Tuesday, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban rejected a ruling by the EU's Court of Justice that his government had failed to fulfill its obligations in relaxing immigration laws. We will maintain the existing regime, even if the European Court ordered us to change it, Orban said in his end of year news conference on Tuesday. The reality is that we have to stop the migrants at the borders, he declared. This can be solved by one thing, changing the European asylum rules. But this process has not even started yet. In an appeal following his weekly general audience Wednesday, Pope Francis said that all European nations should share in the consequences of the migratory phenomenon occurring in the Mediterranean area. During my visit to Cyprus and Greece, I was able to once again personally touch wounded humanity in refugees and migrants, the pontiff said. I also noted how only some European countries are bearing most of the consequences of the migratory phenomenon in the Mediterranean area, while in reality a shared responsibility is necessary from which no country can exempt itself. The Pope singled out Italy for praise while urging other European countries to follow suit. And again, underneath all this is the globalist thinking that people have a right to do whatever they want and go to any country that they want and become a financial burden to any country that they want. And this is their human right. This is how this is being viewed today. And, if we look at the United States, and granted, our system is so bottlenecked and archaic, and it does need to be changed to streamline the process significantly for legal immigration. But, again, to look at these things through the lens that the globalist is presenting, that there has to be just simply a global world where people move about freely, everybody has the same thing, no one has any more than anyone else, and people have a right to immigrate into any country without permission or going through any type of process, is just feeding into what's going to happen when there's a global empire during the tribulation. And the fact that there's this religious leader who's waving this banner certainly points to the fact that someday there is going to be a religion that the world follows. So Revelation 13 identifies it as Satan worship, and there is going to be a false prophet someday. I'm not trying to draw a parallel with the Pope, but interesting that he has been very aggressive in some of the things that he has stated, like equating the failure to adhere to protecting the planet and what the World Health Organization and the United Nations is pushing all around the world to climate change issues is sin. It's a sin not to consider climate change in your national agenda. So, again, just a very strange season of history we live in. Now, obviously, as we come close to wrapping up our time here, we are in the Christmas season. Today is Christmas Eve. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and Saturday, Christmas Day. And we've been talking some of the church about the fact that, and let me just pause. I appreciate all the comments and on social media about where places in the United States, cities are covered with nativity scenes. I haven't seen one in any store anywhere here in Southern California during this whole Christmas season, and I've seen a couple. We went out and took our youngest granddaughter Christmas light looking last night. We did see a couple of nativity scenes, but by and large, everything's Santa, 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 reindeer and snowmen and the like. And things are radically different than they used to be even less than a generation ago. And Breitbart reports that California Methodist Church uses nativity scene to feature the climate change agenda. The Claremont United Methodist Church in California is using the birth of Jesus to showcase its climate change agenda. The installation features a mural depicting the Holy Family standing in front of a scene with smoke spewing from industrial rigging and pollution in the background, reported the Inland Valley Daily Bulletin on Tuesday. The scene also features the phrase "creation in peril." According to the report, the church's associate pastor, Martha Morales, said the Creative Peacemaking Committee made the decision this year to focus the Christmas scene on concern for the environment after previous efforts to feature immigration as a focal point. The last couple of years, or 2019, I believe, I don't know that they did anything in 2020, but they had the manger scene behind a chain link fence and was trying to portray the plight of migrants and all the other things that we just mentioned a moment ago. And don't get me wrong, of course, we have the responsibility to care and love for people, and the church ought to be at the forefront of this, but it's not a political issue. It is just a matter of caring for people who are in need. And like Paul told Titus, meet urgent needs. That's what the church is supposed to do. And again, but we don't exploit the most important event in the course of human history, and that is Jesus coming into the world as a human child, God with us. Because the fact is, and we just talked about this on Sunday, this is the most important prophecy that's ever been fulfilled, because all other prophecies hang on it. Isaiah 53 hangs on it. All of Revelation hangs on it. The unveiling of Christ. If Christ was never born, if he didn't become God with us, Isaiah 9:6 wasn't true. Isaiah 7:14 wasn't true. And so this is a significant event, and it is not open to exploitation by Santa or climate change or immigration or anything else. And the idea for the nativity scene was born out of us wanting it to be a prophetic message about our faith and how we act and live it out in the world. Listen to this. Christmas is not just the story of the birth of Jesus. Really? What is it? This is not just a time when we feel all calm and peaceful and give each other nice presents. The story of Christmas is a deep and challenging story of a marginalized family that fled their home to go to Egypt. And we tend to ignore these really challenging parts of the Christmas story. Each Christmas, the church uses its nativity scene to signal its views on various social justice issues, including here's the answer. Black Lives Matter was their focus last year. And in 2019, they depicted the Holy Family as caged illegal migrants. Morales, however, said the goal of the church's display is not to be political, but educational. Our hope is this will be a prophetic message, she said, the Daily Bulletin noted. And the purpose is to remind everyone that if we're not responding to our neighbors with justice and mercy, then we're not responding to the call of Christmas. The church's website features a reconciling statement that says, as faithful disciples of Jesus and his teachings, we advocate for the full inclusion and acceptance of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender persons and their families in the church and community. As a congregation, we commit to welcoming and being led by clergy of any gender or orientation. We offer all the pastoral and congregational care of our church to all people. Amazing. And to use the Christmas story to advance an anti-biblical agenda is just simply stunning. But those are the days in which we now live. There's a strong delusion. There's a mass defection from truth. There's a lack of enduring or putting up with sound doctrine. Now, here's another kooky story. And it just, sometimes these things just blow my mind. I can't believe how people got to the state that their brains operate in the way that they do. The Gateway Pundit says a mother uses a Christmas card to announce her kindergartner is non-binary. Young adult author and Los Angeles mother Jennifer Chen said she is so proud of her kindergarten-age daughter that decided she wanted to be non-binary and use they, them, he pronouns. The child, named Claire at birth, now wants to be referred to as Clark. And Chen asked her friends to refer to Clark as her son, who is non-binary. In late November, Chen posted their family Christmas card photo on Instagram, and the card shows a photo of herself, her husband, Brendan, and her twin daughters, Chloe, and now Clark. The caption of the post reads, I'd like you all to meet Clark, formerly known as Claire. Clark prefers they, them, he pronouns and would like to be known as my kid, my son, who is non-binary. Clark asked us to tell our friends and family who they are now. What kindergartner even knows what non-binary means? And the thing that just gets me about this, for a kid of that age to be directing traffic in the home is just beyond disgusting and ridiculous. And what poor, pitiful examples of a parent this couple is. I mean, what kid in kindergarten doesn't want to be something that they're not? Like a cowboy, like a nurse, or a doctor, or an astronaut. Should NASA have to hire Clark because he decided now he wants to be a female astronaut or whatever? It's ridiculous. And to use, again, Christmas as a springboard to promote something that is absolutely insane and non biblical is just over the top. Jesus, come get us. Come get us soon. The Christian headline says fentanyl, this is a tragic story. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death among Americans ages 18 to 45 over the last year. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death of young Americans between 18 and 45 years of age. According to a new study by the CDC, between 2020 and 2021, fentanyl overdoses have been the leading causes of death among American adults from 18 to 45. The data, which was analyzed by Families Against Fentanyl, found that almost 79,000 people between the ages of 18 and 45 died of fentanyl overdoses between April 2020 and April 2021. And this administration wants to open the borders, which is where it's coming through, especially the southern border. In 2020, 37,208 people in that age group died of fentanyl overdoses. Did you catch that? In 1 year, it went from 37,208 to 79,000. That number rose to 41,587 in 2021, the Christian Post reports. Suicide and car accidents, the bug, and car accidents followed fentanyl overdoses on the list of highest causes of death. So fentanyl, drug overdoses, and then suicide, and then followed by actual sickness and car accidents. What a tragic thing we see happening in our young people today. This is a national emergency, the article says. America's young adults, thousands of unsuspecting Americans, are being poisoned, James Rao, founders of Family Against Fentanyl, said in a statement shared with the Fox 10 channel in Phoenix. It is widely known that illicit fentanyl is driving the massive spike in drug-related deaths. A new approach to this catastrophe is needed. According to Families Against Fentanyl's website, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. When distributed legally, fentanyl, like morphine, is prescribed to patients dealing with extreme pain. The drug was initially created to alleviate pain experienced by cancer patients or people recovering from surgeries. A lethal dose of fentanyl is extremely small. Where it would take nearly 30 milligrams of heroin to die, just 2 milligrams of fentanyl can kill someone. According to Families Against Fentanyl, illicitly manufactured fentanyl has been found in nearly every type of street drug. And in response to the recent analysis, Families Against Fentanyl launched a petition urging the U.S. government to label illegal fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, which would enable the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Drug Enforcement Agency, Department of Defense, and other relevant federal agencies to better coordinate their efforts and immediately publish the necessary administrative directives to eliminate the threat posed by these deadly substances. In 2021, federal authorities seized a record number of drugs, according to the data gathered by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Arm of the Department of Homeland Security, including 11,201 pounds of fentanyl from people doing what? Crossing the border. Yeah, that's right, Joe. Open the border. Let's make sure we can get more of this in our country and kill more of our young people. In a statement issued last week, the Drug Enforcement Administration shared that over 20 million counterfeit pills containing fentanyl had been seized this year. On Wednesday, Biden issued an executive order allowing sanctions against foreigners involved in illegal drug trafficking and production. Allowing sanctions, not prison, sanctions. Again, just an absolutely incredible time that we now live in. Incredible in the negative sense, that is. Now, we've been talking about the fact that there's weather anomalies that are part of the last day's scenario, and we've made mention of the fact last week, I believe, that the word seismos, translated as earthquakes in Matthew 24, 3-8, can also be translated as a gale or tempest or an atmospheric event. And AccuWeather reports that December was and listen to the phrase they use, ridiculously active month for tornadoes in the U.S. There is no question that December 2021 has been a month that has featured a host of anomalous weather, including a historic tornado outbreak and record breaking temperatures, along with the first ever December derecho. There has certainly been no shortage of extreme weather. There's a high likelihood that December 21 will end up being the most prolific tornado producing December on record once the final damage surveys are completed. AccuWeather forecaster Randy Atkins said, while tornadoes aren't uncommon during December, the likelihood of a tornado occurring on a December day in the U.S. is 12 to 15%, which is significantly lower than the 90% chance of a tornado occurring on any given day in July. The 3-year average of tornadoes in December is 47. The U.S. has experienced a handful of tornado outbreaks during December. The most tornadoes ever recorded during December occurred in 1982, with a total of 100 twisters. On Christmas Day 9 years ago, in 2012, 29 tornadoes struck from Texas to Alabama, 2 of which were classified as EF3 storms. More recently, in 2015, there were 93 tornado reports for the month after multiple severe weather events devastated the South. A graph showing that for most of the year, 2021 was trending below normal for tornado activity, but historic tornado outbreaks abruptly changed that trend. The SPC listed 80 preliminary tornadoes through December 14th, and that was ahead of the second tornado outbreak in the month. In comparison, only 73 preliminary tornado reports were filed during April of 2021, and April is notoriously the second most active month in terms of recorded tornadoes, with a 3-year average of 224. So again, we're seeing strange weather happening, and this is to be expected as well. And AccuWeather again reports, as the previous article mentioned, Dallas, Houston, and Oklahoma City are set to record the warmest Christmas on record. This Christmas could be the warmest in more than 50 or even 100 years for parts of the south central United States, according to AccuWeather forecasters, saying several cities are tracking toward experiencing their warmest December on record. Dallas, Houston, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee all stand to match or top the record high for December 25 this Saturday. AccuWeather senior meteorologist Brett Anderson said, adding that the highs in the 70s and 80s, which will be more common for much of the south central region, are more typical to mid-October. In Memphis and Tulsa, record highs that date back more than a century or nearly a century could be challenged. The record high for December 25 in Memphis is 76 in 1889 and 73 in Tulsa from 1922. So again, you've got extreme weather happening all over the world, including in the Middle East, where Haaretz is reporting in 2 days the winter storm Carmel brings 1 month's worth of rainfall to Israel. Israel's meteorological service records high rainfall as winter storm Carmel sweeps through the country, the article says, and the snowy Mount Hermon will open to visitors on Thursday. Winter storm Carmel dropped more than 3.9 inches of rain on parts of Israel since making landfall on Monday, causing the Tel Aviv promenade to briefly flood and causing damage across the country. Over the past 2 days, Ben Gurion Airport saw 153 millimeters of rain, while its monthly average for December stands at 138. Dagan, southeast of Tel Aviv, experienced 131 millimeters, and the Tel Aviv coast received 117, according to data from the Israel Meteorological Service. On Tuesday, Tel Aviv promenade was flooded briefly, as the article said, and the weather station near Holon experienced 6.8 inches of rainfall, 80% which fell in 1 day. And so again, all over the world, we're seeing strange weather phenomenon. And rain is not strange. Tornadoes are not strange, but we're seeing them at unprecedented or near unprecedented levels. And again, remembering that Jesus mentioned things are going to happen in a birth pang-like progression. So if we're going to take away anything from it, it ought to be things are getting exciting and the Lord's coming for us soon. Now, we alluded to this earlier, and we'll wrap our time up with this story from the Bloomberg. U.S. hospitals pushed to financial ruin as nurses quit during the pandemic. Across the country, hospitals are buckling under the strain of nursing shortfalls and the spiraling cost of hiring replacements. For Watsonville Community Hospital on California's Central Coast, those costs became too much to bear and contributed to the facility's bankruptcy this month, according to a person close to the story. The shortages are most acute at hospitals like Watsonville that rely on government funding to treat poorer patients since they have fewer resources to compete against the rising cost of keeping staff. The situation adds to the stress facilities that have already experienced responding to the early onset of the virus, just as the last of the federal aid is being doled out. This is like survival stakes, said Stephen Schill, head of the healthcare practice at advisory firm BDO USA. Winners are whoever's highest on the food chain and who has the biggest checkbook. Staffing companies, agencies that provide nurses and other staff on a temporary basis are really, really, really gouging hospitals. St. John's Episcopal Hospital Chief Executive Officer Jerry Walsh has been on the losing side of those battles, beat out by larger, wealthier systems, while laying out thousands of dollars a week to pay more, what he calls exorbitant rates to outside agencies to keep his hospital properly staffed. St. John's, in a remote corner of Queens, treats some of the city's poorest and sickest patients and relies mainly on less lucrative government-insured patients. And this is the worst nursing shortage I have witnessed in my career, Maureen May said, a 30-year veteran of pediatric ICU and the president of the Pennsylvania Association of Staff Nurses and Allied Professionals. Now, again, why are these nurses quitting? And to me, this is one of the most telling and concerning issues about forcing this mandate on everyone, regardless of their own personal desires or wishes, and simply mandating that someone take an unapproved jab that hasn't been tested. And again, we've talked about this before. You know, the fact that the fastest research to market vaccine in the history of these United States prior to the jab that we're now, people are being forced to take, I should say, was 10 years. So how did they get one from research to market in just a matter of months? Well, they didn't test it. And they didn't do the long range studies because they didn't have enough time. They simply got it to market. And there are people within the medical community who are concerned about this. And again, you know, rather than if nurses and doctors are saying, I'll quit my very well-paying job before I'll take this jab, maybe the rest of us ought to think this thing through. Maybe the government ought to pay attention instead of trying to advance their agenda of socialist control. So once again, we see a world that has lost its mind, and this is exactly what we would expect in the last days. And boy, we are at the tail end of them. I just can't imagine the Lord allowing things to continue. We've kind of progressed now to the point where there's just no law. And it doesn't matter. You've got a few people in places of power that are basically dictating to the rest of the world what it is that they can do. And this is going to lead to and feed into the mentality that will cause the world to go after the beast, as recorded in Revelation chapter 13. And oh, by the way, did I mention we won't be here for that? And again, yes, we need to be out and occupying till the Lord comes. We need to be telling people about Jesus. But one of the things I think we always need to remember is that during the tribulation period, there's going to be an angel flying in the mid-heaven preaching the everlasting gospel. That's what's going to fulfill the gospel being preached to the whole world. It's not going to happen before the rapture of the church. We don't have to look for that last person to get saved so the Lord can rapture us, because people are going to get saved during the tribulation. Matter of fact, a numberless multitude of every tribe, tongue, nation of people that no man can number is going to get saved during the tribulation. So we don't need to be looking to make sure that we get that last person saved so we can go home. And the truth is, that is an appointed day and hour. And I believe, like Christ was crucified before the foundations of the world, I believe that day and hour was established before the foundations of the world. And when the clock strikes that moment in time, we're out of here. And in the twinkling of an eye, going to be with the Lord. So let's make sure we're telling people about Jesus until he comes to get us. And let's continue to look up expectantly for that glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. So On behalf of myself, my wife Terry, and all the family at Calvary Chapel Tustin, I want to wish you a very, very Merry Christmas. And let's also keep in mind that there's going to be people this year that are facing Christmas without someone for the very first time, whether they lost them to COVID or for some other reason. Let's keep these people in mind and be praying for them and reach out to them if you happen to know anyone in that particular state. So, with that said, that's it for me, and at least for now. So, whatever the Lord's going to do, we know that He is in control and on the throne. And maybe we'll see you next week. But I do know this: we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.